Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is Krystal Ball. She is the co-host of Rising, which is on The Hill. Krystal, thanks so much for coming back.
It is my pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
Of course. Krystal, why is Elizabeth Warren the choice of the professional class and the establishment? And make it extra spicy.
Oh, boy. You're asking a lot for a Tuesday night.
We deliver a lot every Tuesday night, as you know. That is what it is.
I know. I got to bring my A game. That's how it is. It's one of, to me, the most fascinating dynamics that's playing out because as we talk about, you look at the Sanders coalition and you look at the Warren coalition, and they are very, very different. Not to say that there's no overlap, but basically, if you go up the income scale, you find more and more Warren supporters. If you go up the education scale, you find more and more Warren supporters. And it's exact opposite for Sanders. He has a much more diverse coalition. He's got a much more working class coalition. And so I've been really pondering this question of why, right? Because on the surface level, you look at, some of the policy positioning. They're two of the more progressive candidates in the race, right? There's a lot that would make you think that potentially these candidates are similar. But I think it's very telling, actually, that elites have chosen Warren as their candidate. And what I've come to essentially is that the answer for why the coalitions look so different is the simplest possible one, which is that the working class believes Bernie Sanders will actually deliver for them. And elites are terrified that he will actually deliver for them because the fundamental difference between the two of them is their theories of change, right? One is, wants to make clear she's a capitalist. She's courting the Democratic establishment, sending them handwritten notes with the underlying message being, I'm a team player. I'm not going to rock the boat too much. Sanders has taken a bit of a different approach. I asked him when I interviewed him recently, I said, are you a threat to the Democratic establishment? Because he brought up that Third Way had said, he's an existential threat to the Democratic Party. I said, well, are you? He said, well, yeah, actually, in a way I am. So I think that's the difference is the professional class, media elites who really represent the interests and tastes of the sort of white liberal professional class. They realize that they're going to have to move a little bit more progressive. They're going to have to be a little more populist to keep the pitchforks at bay. So they want to embrace a candidate who captures some of that mood and flavor, but ultimately enables them to keep and hold on to the power that they have. And so I think that's why they gravitate towards Elizabeth Warren.
Right. And I think that is, so there's a couple of things to get to, but I think to make it really concrete, one of the ways you see that manifest is with the systems, like the scale of change that they're actually concretely proposing and then how it's like gone about. So Bernie now, and it's funny, and also the order, right? Which we'll get to in a second, because this, what comes first, a movement or plans or the movement is actually a really important distinction in terms of how you think about politics and how things actually happen. But Warren will put like a decent, student debt relief plan on the table. It would certainly improve people's lives. Obviously, like Betsy DeVos and Trump are at war against students, and Obama didn't do nearly enough to deal with the crisis. So she puts something on the table that's like, okay, you know what? There's going to be a decent amount of students that will benefit from this. However, and I think this is another kind of tendency that you see in the types of people you're talking about, there's like a fetishization of process and complexity, which most like normal people actually don't find super appealing. Like when Ezra Klein wrote years ago, like a lot of people are going to be really stoked to like compare healthcare plans on a website. I mean, you're sitting there like, no, there is literally no human being on earth besides you that wants to look at healthcare plans on a website. So, and then Sanders just comes out and he's like, we're just going to wipe it. Like, this is a massive injustice. College should be free to begin with. Let's just do this. No BS. So do you think that in some ways, even when we say like, oh, they're both progressive, it's already actually very signal to me, like the ways in which, again, it's not even just a question of who is more or less progressive. I think actually really clearly that like Bernie Sanders is some type of like Democratic or social democrat, whatever the hell. It doesn't, people get really wonky about this stuff. I think it's relatively irrelevant right now. And Elizabeth Warren is a progressive who wants to use the technocracy to benefit more people. Bernie really wants to clean it up, and it makes it both more radical and a lot more simple. And that actually eliminates a lot of like need for like self-important information arbitrage in our society.
Yes, totally. I mean, Naomi Klein, I think, was the one who said that Elizabeth Warren is like identity politics for journalists, which I think is like, I could not possibly capture what's going on better, because she is the best incarnation of what they want to be, right? She's got the Ivy League pedigree, and she talks in a way that's, very intellectual, but down home just enough so that they can imagine that people who aren't just like them will find her compelling.
Yep.
And, I find the obsession with plans and white papers. First of all, this is far from the first time that Democrats have fallen in love with like a white paper candidate, right? This is like something that we seem to repeat over and over again. But I also find the obsession with it a little bit ridiculous when it feels like you're basically playing fantasy politics.
Yes.
None of this matters if you don't have a way to actually accomplish something. And to me, Sanders' frame of organizer-in-chief, of understanding that the only way that anything changes in this country is through a grassroots movement of multiracial working class citizens. That's the only way that the dynamics of power in this country actually change. Like, to me, that's the single most important thing. And then we can look, once we are able to be in a position where you can actually do something, let's like work out the details, let's figure it out, all of that. Sanders has quite a number of detailed plans himself that he has, put forward, especially in the past few weeks. But if you don't have that theory of change right, then the rest of it to me is kind of irrelevant. I had, there was a Twitter follower who put it like this. He said, basically, Sanders wants to democratize power, right? So it's not just about, here's our plan that we're going to implement, right? And you're going to trust us to implement. It's no, actually, we trust you, the citizens of this country, to actually come up with the plans and be in charge of making the changes and holding the power. And that is truly radical. And that scares the shit out of people, because then you don't get to control the game anymore, right? It's out of your hands how far this thing goes. And that's why, if you are someone who has done well in our quote unquote meritocracy, if this system is working for you, that makes you pretty uncomfortable.
No, I couldn't underline everything you're saying. It's so right on. It's so on point. And I actually think that that's the other really troubling part about the Warren argument and coalition, is that it's relying on one part. Yes, like it's the identity politics of journalists. And part of that coalition is people who are still in a fantasy world about how change actually happens, that there's some sort of like, oh, well, the reason that we haven't dealt with, the monopolies from Silicon Valley, or we haven't clawed back, the economy and people's lives from Wall Street is, yes, there's corruption. Yes, money influences politics. I understand, I think that there's clearly discourse around that. But that's still that some part of it is because like there just hasn't been an elegant enough plan. There hasn't been a smart enough group of people put in a room cooking things up. And the fetishization of that is incredible because, that's the easiest part of the process. I'm not downgrading it, but like anybody can put a smart group of people in a room, and there's a lot of policy proposals floating around. So this part is actually really quite simple. The part you're talking about is the really hard part. How does it actually happen? That is joined with this kind of fantasy and fetishization of plans is joined with, I think you're right. I think it is the part of the Financial Times editorial page, and I really do mean the Financial Times, you'll probably be more likely to see this, right? If the Wall Street Journal editorial page is like, screw those people, man, let's look at what Bolsonaro's doing, or, other people are saying like, hey, why can't we just elect any Democrat? You'll see some people in the Financial Times who are saying like, hey, this is getting really bad. We need to throw these people a bone. And that is the nexus of the coalition. It's like people in the sort of professional classes that are still deluded about the level of rot we're in, and then people in the elite oligarch classes who maybe are the most conscious, but as you say, they don't want any fundamental challenge to their power.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so telling. They have this shop in the Hamptons called the Monogram Shop. I'm sure you know about this, where they sell these plastic cups with the candidates' names on them, and they keep this tally of like which candidates' cups have sold the most to the rich people doing their summer fundraisers in the Hamptons. And Elizabeth Warren's cups are sold out. Like, if those folks, those wealthy individuals who are summering in the Hamptons and holding their fundraisers, if they really believed that she was going to be able to accomplish the things that she's talking about, a wealth tax as one example, do you think that they would really be supporting her? I seriously doubt it. Right? They back her because they like they have this, fetishization of Harvard and the Ivy League and this, intellectualism for intellectualism's sake. They believe that she will do enough to placate the masses, but not so much that their class status and power status is actually threatened.
Yeah, that's 100% it. And what do you make of that? Because this is also really amplified in the fact that Bernie Sanders went out of the gate, started building a movement, started building an independent media infrastructure, and he's been doing this for years. Elizabeth Warren, the first thing was she has a plan, which is antithetical to we have a movement. And now she started to say, and the campaign starting to say, well, we're going to build a movement in response to the argument that people are getting through, which is like, hey, you're not going to get anything done just because you have smart white papers. What do you make of that? Like, what does that sort of progression tell you about the campaign as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. Look, she's very smart, and I'm not trying to bash her. Out of the many candidates in the race, right? She is superior to like 90% of them,
yeah,
right?
Of course, of course.
But this is just like this is the reality of what I see happening. I mean, I think basically what she wants to say is, look, I know you like all the Sanders ideas, but you can have all that you like of Sanders with me without it being scary, right? And so, you like this talk about a movement? Like, let's talk about a movement, right? That's gonna get people excited. That's gonna prove that you don't have to look elsewhere to, another progressive candidate. So let's talk about a movement here too. And I do think, look, she has a particular vulnerability, which is that her support is the whitest among all of the top candidates. And, I think that's an issue for her as people start to take her more seriously in terms of electability, right? And so, so partly maybe the play is to adopt some of the language of Sanders and hope that she can eat into some of that working class base and make more of a connection there where the idea and the concept of a movement and grassroots power has clearly taken root.
You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.